News from Government House, Pretoria, where South Africa's newly elected Prime Minister, Dr. Malan, was sworn in by the Governor-General of the Union, Mr. Van Zyl, at the beginning of a new chapter in South Africa's history.
Comrade Oliver said, well, I like this because we now know we have an enemy in power. And I think that we're going to have a better opportunity of mobilizing our people.
They came in the heat of rum to praise at the beat of my drum. Oh, people take note. I wasn't allowed to vote. They sang a song sharp as the devil's throne. They spoke in the gun and rifle tone, and I answered in the language of stone.
Our policy is one which is called by an Afrikaans word apartheid. And I'm afraid that has been misunderstood so often. It could just as easily, and perhaps much better, be described as a policy of good neighborliness. Accepting that there are differences between people. And while these differences exist, and you have to acknowledge them, at the same time, you can live together, aid one another, but that it can best be done when you act as good neighbors always do.
The reality of apartheid was that whites ruled, blacks served. The everyday symbol of apartheid was the pass, the identity document that was a black person's proof of existence. Without it, you were illegal. A policeman could demand to see your house anytime, anywhere, and if you didn't have it.
The Bantu Education Act of 1953 explicitly defined the world of South African education as an ethnic binary in terms of white and black. The National Party's stance on South African education is exemplified well by the following statement from Dr. H.F. Verwoerd, the Minister for Native Affairs in the National Party. The school must equip him to meet the demand which the economic life of South Africa will impose him. There is no place for the Bantu in the European community above the level of certain forms of labor. This statement comes from Verwoerd's speech before the National Senate on July 7, 1954, and strongly illustrates the racist undertones built into the Bantu Education Act. Under the Act, the state-controlled system denied black people access to the same educational opportunities and resources enjoyed by white South Africans. It denigrated black people's history, culture, and identity. It promoted myths and racial stereotypes in its curricula and textbooks. African people and communities were portrayed as traditional, rural, and unchanging. Additionally, enormous disparities in funding between white and black schools and ridiculous student-teacher ratios adversely affected the quality of education. Overcrowded classrooms, inadequate instruction, shabby school buildings, poor teacher training, and a lack of textbooks and basic school supplies characterized Native African schools. So this all begs the question, how did the marginalized peoples of South Africa respond to these conditions?
Meanwhile, to ensure the physical separation of the races, non-whites were told where they could and couldn't live. Black settlements within white areas, termed black spots, were to be cleared and their people shifted out.
In the heart of Johannesburg, places like Sophiatown, which for years had been a threat to the public health and safety, were tackled with vigor and energy. It was alleged that the Bantu were dissatisfied and would refuse to move. In fact, they were happy to get away from these plague spots where they had been obliged to live in thousands.
But the song they sang showed how they really felt. The crowd of around 15,000 surrounded a police station under the command of Colonel Pienaar. The police got nervous.
Bema ngaphandle, uPienaar
The police were standing outside when Captain Pienaar raised his baton. Some men were standing next to their armoured cars. Then they got in and closed the hatches. There was another line of police in front of the armoured cars. They had their rifles at the ready. He dropped his baton and they shot us.
After quite a while, everything was quiet. I pick up my head and I look around, I find everything is quiet. I find everybody, bodies are laying down there. My uncle died there, my younger brother, and my sister. Those are the people who died there. I've lost people that I loved and people that I needed them. Sometimes when I sit down, I find my things are not going right. I say, if my mother was here, my uncle was here, maybe things would have went right.
"67 died that afternoon.
It's futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people.
Demonstrations against the government by Africans continue on an increasing scale, despite the decree of a state of emergency and the arrest of hundreds of leaders of the opposition.
In response to Sharpeville, protests broke out across the country. Convinced that non-violent demonstrations could achieve nothing, a wing of the ANC, led by Nelson Mandela, began a sabotage campaign. But like the non-violent protests, the tactics failed. Mandela was arrested in 1962 and later in 1964 sentenced to life imprisonment on Robben Island.
Mandela had declared in court, "I planned sabotage because all lawful methods of opposition were closed. I have cherished the ideal of democratic society with equal opportunity for all. That is an ideal," he said, "for which I am prepared to die."
And outside the Pretoria court, Nelson Mandela...
Some speakers have argued that the best way to bring the government of South Africa to accomplish these objectives, to bring the South African government to heel, is for this council to recommend that the General Assembly, that South Africa be expelled from membership in the United Nations organization. My government believes that this kind of all or nothing approach would be a major strategic mistake, especially at a time when we are hearing what may be new voices of conciliation out of South Africa. These new voices should be tested.
To remove a country or a government from the pressures of civilized international opinion inside this organization would be a terrible confession of failure by us all. My government is opposed to such a course. It is the easy option, Mr. President. We believe there are more difficult, but infinitely more worthwhile possibilities. The United Nations is now, to all intents and purposes, a universal organization. It reflects the realities of the world in 1974, and it is the stronger and the healthier for this fact. Yet it is argued that universality should not be an overriding consideration. Article 6 of the Charter was purposely inserted.
is the showplace of Bophuthatswana, one of the so-called independent homelands where South African blacks have been relocated. It's a lavish resort where you can relax and enjoy some of the world's headline entertainers. It's part of the reality of apartheid.
In London, we were taken to the studio, and then that was the first time for us as a group to meet Paul Simon. Wow, this is wonderful. It felt so good and so exciting.
I remember very well the first time I met Nelson Mandela. He was still a prisoner. He was brought under cover of darkness to my office in Cape Town, which later became his office. He was taller than I expected. I was impressed by how ramrod straight he stood. And I found him to be a good listener. Although we didn't discuss at that first meeting anything really of substance, we were just testing each other. Both of us afterwards could say, I've met this man, I think I can do business with him.
There's Mr. Mandela, Mr. Nelson Mandela, a free man taking his first steps into a new South Africa. Mrs. Winnie Mandela next to him, waving to the crowds, hand in hand, they leave the Victor Verster prison. Officials, marshals of the National Reception Committee trying to get the people, and a salute from Mr. Nelson Mandela, his wife Winnie, greeting the people.
In 1994, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela became the first black president of South Africa after winning the country's first democratic elections. His countrymen celebrated his victory as the start of a new era in a South Africa free from the chains of apartheid.
Never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one born